Hello everyone, my name is Jesse Maurer and I'm the Worship and Creative Arts Pastor here at Maple City Chapel. I want to welcome you to today's podcast. During today's conversation, our lead pastor, Dr. Jay Shetler, sits down with Tanya Wieland to discuss anxiety and trauma. Tanya is a licensed clinical social worker with over 25 years of experience in the field of mental health and 12 years in private practice. It's a super interesting conversation. Let's join them now. Here's Pastor Jay.
We are in a sermon series right now on mental health, and as part of that, we're recording different podcasts and on different subjects we're talking about. And one of those topics is anxiety, and another one is trauma. And we're going to kind of merge both of those today, and talk about those. But first, I'd love for the people listening to get to know you just a little bit. Tanya, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Well, I am married for we've been saying 30 odd years.
After a while, you lose track of the years, and you just...
I think it's 33, but we do say 30 odd years. And I have 3 children, all of them grown and in their 20s. I have been working in the mental health field since I was in my 20s.
Okay.
And I think I met you probably when I was in my 20s working as a case manager.
Yeah, I think we met at Oaklawn. I was there. That was my first job out of graduate school as a psychologist.
Yep. I think I remember that. You were the psychologist, and we would have staffings together. I was a case manager. And along the way, there were people that kind of called into my life and said, hey, you might be good at this, or you should consider this. I came from my parents. My dad is, I would consider an immigrant child. So he wasn't born in the U.S.
Okay.
Serbian. And he was the first and only person of his family to have a college education.
Oh, wow.
And when he was young and my mom was young, they grew up in poverty. So when my dad's 16-year-old girl sat in front of him and said, "Oh, I think I want to be a psychologist," his response was, "I don't know how you're going to pay for that."
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Even though they were wonderful parents, but that just wasn't within his frame, right?
Yeah.
His thinking. So I didn't know how I was going to pay for it either. So I got like a general degree in communication.
Okay.
And then got married out of college. And all along the way, there were people like my husband at the time and a therapist at Oaklawn that ended up saying, hey, do what you love. I think you'd be good at this. And I just would take one step after another and kind of got carried along in the flow to now I've been in private practice for 12 years. And I love it. I love it. It's my passion. So,
yeah. And you're very good at what you do. I can say that from personal experience. Did you start in private practice in my office, or were you in somewhere? Okay.
I did. I had my license through Oaklawn.
Okay.
And I worked at Memorial High School as a mental health liaison for a while, and did that.
Yeah. So then you jumped into private practice, and
because you said, "Hey, could you help us out for a little bit?" And I said, sure. I'll just stand in for a little bit." And here I am, 12 years later. Yeah. Yeah.
And has your practice kind of progressed or changed over time in terms of who you see and what you do? Say a little bit about your focus.
Yeah, I think it's changed over time. I think that in the beginning, I'm just trying to find my feet, right? And I met with adolescents, and I did a lot of EMDR. I got trained in EMDR back then. And
say a little bit about what that might be for people who don't know.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a modality of treatment. That was back when the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Besser van der Kolk came out. And I devoured that book, and it really resonated with me that our bodies hold the pain that we experience throughout our lives. So EMDR was the first type of therapy that I felt integrated those thoughts for me, because it uses this bilateral stimulation. It used to be moving your eyes, like if you...
Right.
Now...
It was at first seemed a little odd and got kind of,
Yeah, it took me a long time. So EMDR was kind of developed in the 1980s. I didn't get trained in it until the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s because of that, because I thought, that sounds weird, you know? But after years of having research about EMDR that made it as effective as CBT, like the research would say that it's right up there.
Again, I'll just clarify, CBT would be cognitive behavioral therapy, which is considered for a long time kind of the treatment of choice for depression, anxiety, and some of those things. Cognitive
behavioral therapy is a lot about changing your behaviors and changing your thoughts that alters your emotions. And it has a lot of efficacy. It's not what I do, but EMDR has the same kind of research and support behind it. So I did that for a while. And then I started getting involved in experiential internal family systems theory, lots of different theories that I just kind of devoured the trainings on. And the more I learned, the more I saw people opening up and healing. I went from what I would consider symptom management to a view of inner healing and wholeness. So that I incorporate way more today than I did back when I started.
Well, I've learned so much from you, and one of the reasons, like every time we talk, I walk away with probably 5 books that I have to buy.
I know.
And 5 new podcasts that I have to listen to. And
I feel the same.
Yeah, I've loved you've helped me appreciate the role of the body in so much, like we'll talk about anxiety and trauma. And I think in the past, I really focused a lot on the cognitive behavioral, especially the thinking part of it. And I still think that's important, but so much about what we'll talk about, it lives in the body and it involves the body. And so the experiential stuff and the EMDR is a way of engaging the body in a way that brings healing in a whole new way.
Yeah, really does. I believe that phrase that the body keeps the score. Yeah. And I think that we can, there's proof in just how our bodies are built. And it's always such an interesting question in my office when I ask somebody, where do you feel that in your body? I often get like a look like, what does that even mean, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not really used to or trained to sense the somatic sensations of our body, but our emotions are definitely, I mean, who hasn't felt the lump in their throat?
Right.
Right?
Butterflies in the stomach.
All of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm dying to jump into anxiety, but I want to hit one more thing that you do. I know you do marriage work and especially marriage intensives. And Beth and I actually got to do a 2-day intensive with you.
Yes.
Which was
fun.
Very fun and very helpful to us. How did you get interested in that kind of intensive marriage counseling?
Yeah. So there's a retreat center called Onsite outside of Nashville in Tennessee. And for a couple of years, I went down there for trainings. They kind of specialize in experiential therapy and psychodrama, which is a terrible name. I mean, nobody wants to be called psychodrama, but that is what we were doing in our intensive. And the more I learned about that and the more I learned how trauma is healed, through getting up and moving around and using.
Can you just define psychodrama briefly? Like what?
Sure.
Because it does sound like you're a little psycho and dramatic, and none of those are really good things at all. But
Right. So psychodrama is a technique of therapy that uses kind of role play to work through trauma. So a simple example of that might be the empty chair. You might put a person in a chair that represents your father if you've been wounded by your father. And then you can have a conversation with that person and kind of role play it or act it out. There are other people that can join in the process that add to your understanding of what's going on. It's usually done in a group setting. You can do it in a marital setting or even individual. But I always say it's easy to hide on the couch.
Yeah.
Like you can really sit with someone for a long time and talk and talk and talk and talk. And you can hide those kind of deep felt emotions. But when you get up and you move around the room, I mean, I think that you saw that in our experience too. Right?
Yeah. I remember all the way back to my college psychology training. There was one class and one professor in particular that talked about movement and emotion. And he would just do something like, so someone would say something kind of in an angry tone. And he would do this. And he said, shake my hands and say that. And to see the emotion that was elicited by somebody, like just that movement. And I think that in all kinds of contexts when I worship, like raising my hands or moving in worship, in prayer, in all kinds of ways helps to unlock, for me at least, the emotion inside of me.
Right. So why wouldn't therapy incorporate that too? So that's kind of what is psychodrama is about. I have found a passion with meeting with couples and using that technique because if you get out of the cognitive back and forth talk therapy and use these other techniques, it's so much easier to find a place of compassion for yourself and for your spouse. And I often find couples walking away from those intensives like, I never thought of it that way, or that type of thing. That's my jam.
Yeah.
I love that.
We may come back, I think it connects in some way to the topic of trauma, because a lot of times what you find in that couples work is we all have those wounds, and that's part of what's creating some of the issues in marriage.
Oh,
so
for sure.
We'll circle back to that a little bit. But let's jump into the anxiety piece here.
Okay.
Say a little bit more about anxiety, just for those who may not know much, like how would you define it? What is it?
So I think that anxiety gets kind of a bad rap sometimes, in that we all think it's a terrible thing. But when you think about that your body is actually made to help you survive, it is supposed to be looking for danger. That's why we're here right now, because we were able to do that as a species. Anxiety is that biological response to say, this is dangerous. This is dangerous. Now, sometimes, if you can think about this is dangerous as the accelerator going down on the car, right? Sometimes that accelerator is down when it shouldn't be.
So we think there might be danger there when it's really not.
Right.
Dangerous.
Right. Or your brain is telling you it's dangerous when it's not, because it's reminding you of something, some wound that you've had before that it wants to avoid. So let's say you've been bitten by a snake.
Right.
And you're walking down the street, your brain is looking for the snake so that you don't get bit again. And if you see a hose, that accelerator goes way down, right?
Yes.
That's
you have a whole physical reaction to it, and
yeah, you get flooded, fight or flight, right? Happens. To me, that's my understanding of anxiety. It's your body's natural propensity to keep you alive, kind of too energized or on too much.
Yeah, I love that. Like, I do see anxiety as a gift. I think sometimes they're like pain, like oh, nobody wants pain. But if you didn't have the ability to feel pain, like you would die. So anxiety is like this God-given system that helps us stay alert for and react to things that we see it might be dangerous, and that helps us survive. I always find it fascinating how like a moderate amount of anxiety seems to be a good thing in a lot of ways, right?
Good thing. Yes. I would say that anyone who has not seen the movie Inside Out 2 specifically really needs to see it, because that's a great depiction of what anxiety is. And they the researchers of internal family systems helped create that, right? So
that doesn't surprise me at all.
No, right? And it's a positive depiction of what anxiety is trying to help. And I do think it is trying to help. Yeah. Watch that movie.
Yeah. Yes. It's 1 and 2 were both fascinating. 2, what's the girl? I'm blanking on the girl's
name.
Riley. She's more of a preteen teen at that point. And it's really fascinating. So anxiety is this warning system. I think it often, as it affects our whole being. So it affects our body. It affects our our thoughts. Say more about its impact on the body. How does our body react when we get triggered with anxiety?
Right. So I don't know if people listening won't be able to see my hand, but I'm raising my hand and I have my thumb kind of inside and my fingers are over the top. And if this is your nervous system, the frontal lobe of your brain, my fingers here, is your executive functioning. It's there for to make decisions. Your language center is in there, your memory center. That's not what is looking for danger. What's looking for danger is underneath here. This is the amygdala, and the amygdala is always assessing dangerous, not dangerous, dangerous, not dangerous. And sometimes it gets it right and sometimes it doesn't. But it sends messages down your nervous system to your adrenal glands, which are lower, and your adrenaline gets released and other hormones too, right? If it depicts danger. So I liken that to the accelerator down in your car. Your adrenal glands are on, the accelerator's down. The only way really to give that message to the central brain that we're not in danger is to press on the vagus nerve, this lower part of the nervous system, of the vagus nerve. That happens through breath. Makes sense, because if you are running from a tiger and you get into the cottage and you slam the door and the tiger doesn't get you, the first thing you do is go, right? So you're telling your body, I'm not in danger anymore. That's what's happened biologically when you're anxious. Accelerators down. They have to find a way to tell your system that it's not dangerous.
Yeah, and all those things, again, it's a gift that, like, you mentioned adrenaline, your heart rate increase. All these things are to help you be able to do the fight or flight more effectively to protect yourself.
For sure. It's super helpful when you're being chased by something that is going to kill you. It's not as helpful when you're talking to your spouse and you're triggered.
Danger, danger, danger.
Right, right. You really want to work on that,
Yeah. Say more about that part. So when we get triggered by something that isn't a tiger, it's a spouse, like, how does that play out in our mind, in our body?
Yeah. What's interesting about that first is that what I was saying, your frontal lobe, right? This executive thinking, the first thing that happens when your amygdala depicts danger is that frontal lobe goes offline, right? You're not supposed to be. So you're not
as logical as you would otherwise be.
No, this is why I'm sure you've had the experience of talking to a couple and one person says, this is what happened, and another person says the exact opposite thing happened. And you're trying to figure out, I used to think, is someone lying here? But now I don't think that anymore. I think, oh, y'all both were triggered and your brain was like processing that differently, right? In the sense that you were in danger. You felt like you were in danger. So it's not necessarily like you were lying and you're not. It's like, this is how this person saw it and that's how the other. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So they just have because their brain is seeing danger and they're reacting different ways. They're seeing a completely different picture of what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you remember things differently. Yeah.
And so we talk about fight or flight. There's probably other, I think, fawn and freeze and some other things like that. But those are all your body's attempt to be safe at some level, right? Like that. So it's trying to find a way to deal with the danger, whatever that danger is. And anxiety is representing that danger.
Right. And that brings me to this theory of polyvagal theory that I think we've talked about before. That is a fascinating theory to me because there's 3 different levels to the nervous system in this polyvagal theory. The first is ventral, which is where you're calm and you can access play and you're content. And it's, if you think of this as a yellow color, right? Okay. The middle is what we call sympathetic. It means when the accelerator starts to go down. So it can encompass everything from a mild worry, right, to a panic episode. All of that is encompassed in the center This is called the sympathetic state.
Okay.
You can think of that as red,
Okay.
right? And that's what we normally think about when we think about our nervous system. On, off, on, right? Peaceful, not peaceful. The thing is that when you're confronted with something, when your body is confronted with something that doesn't feel like it can win, a trauma, a threat, something like that, there's a third place in your nervous system to go. We call it dropping down to dorsal, right? So when you're in that, it's like shut down, right? So it's deeper. It's almost like playing dead, right? So
would it be like, okay, I don't think I can outrun this threat. I don't think I can outfight this threat.
yes.
And so then what's left is kind of this shutdown.
Shut down. And that looks like, it can look like depression. It can look like addiction, numbing, kind of hangs out in that. And you can think of that as a blue area of your nervous system, right? So once you understand and kind of can play with, how do I get from, am I in blue? How do I wake up from that? If I'm constantly in panic mode, what do I do there? But it's really helpful to know what's happening in your nervous system without blame or shame, right? This is what your body is supposed to do when it has the beliefs or senses a threat that it's sensing.
Yeah. And I think we'll get into this more with the internal family systems, but part of that is being able to look at those things from a curious mindset, non-judgmental. It's like, okay, this is my body's designed at some level to do this.
Yes.
Maybe it's misreading this threat or it's overreacting in some way,
Right.
but just being curious about it and trying to understand it.
Yeah. Curiosity is like your best friend.
Yes.
Yeah. Once you can slip into curiosity and start to ask those questions outside of shame, a lot of healing can happen.
The other part of anxiety, so we talk about the body, the other would be just the mind or the thoughts. Like there seems like anxiety does something to our thoughts, or maybe even our thoughts can lead to anxiety. Say more about that piece of anxiety.
Right. I'm not sure which comes first, the chicken or the egg. You know what I mean? I'm not sure. The body responds first. I know that. Like the body will tell you before the mind will. But once the mind senses, once your thoughts are sensing this pit in your stomach or this, right? It's trying to make sense of it always, right? Like why am I feeling this way? That's where we get ruminating thoughts.
Okay.
Does this person like me? I think I said something silly, right? And we're trying to make sense of why do I have this pit in my stomach? And I think they can feed off of each other, right?
Yeah. It seems like certain thoughts, like I think what if thoughts would be an example. And you can what if almost anything, but what if I fail this test? What if, whatever. There's so many, but it's like asking these questions about what might go wrong in the future.
Right.
That seems to trigger, at least for me, anxiety.
For sure, because we can't know.
Yeah.
This uncertainty. I mean, that's what most of the anxiety in COVID was, right? We don't know.
Right.
We didn't,
right.
in those first weeks, we were all in a state of perpetual anxiety because there
were so many unknowns.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we tend not to fill that out with the best possible outcomes, but
right, because the best possible outcome doesn't survive, right?
That's true. Yeah. No, good point.
Yeah.
We have to be prepared for the worst case scenario if we're going to survive. And
absolutely. I mean, the animal that's walking through the forest and just enjoying the leaves is not going to survive as much as the animal that's looking for the danger.
Gotcha. So the more anxious we are, the healthier we are. Is what you're saying?
Is that what I'm saying? I don't know.
The greader our chance for survival.
Yeah, survival. Yeah, I'll say that. Maybe.
Walk around on edge all the time. We had a whole podcast on this, but I'm curious from your perspective. There's a lot of writing and theories about technology and anxiety, and especially for, I would say, younger women, girls.
Yeah.
What's your theory on that? Like, do you think there's a link between smartphones and technology and anxiety?
I think it's always been there, this comparison game, right? I think the comparison game has always been there, especially like in junior high and in high school, right? You're just trying to find your identity. You're in a developmental stage where you don't quite know who you are yet. And so you're looking to your peers. That is normal. You're supposed to be doing that. When it's in front of you all the time and you don't have any break from it, there's no opportunity for your nervous system to settle. There's less opportunity for you to get to that place where you feel like, I'm okay, right? It used to be that you could go to your bedroom and journal or play an instrument or draw, do whatever, do other things. I don't think kids are doing that as much anymore. They are a little bit. I'm not going to say a broad stroke, but I think that.
But it's not like that was at school and now I've left.
Right.
I'm away from the social comparison.
Right.
Like,
no, it's worse when you get home.
It's right there in front of you everywhere you go. And
Yeah.
Interesting. So social comparison would be a big part of what you would think would drive some of that, especially for the young teen girls and young adult women. For
sure. I mean, that's what I see in my office. I haven't done any research on that, but I think that that's generally what I see.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And the spread of ideas that are not helpful.
Right.
And the ideas that are helpful are on there too, right? It's just hard to like.
One of the things that I found most interesting is like when I think of mental health, like in some ways, technology, social media, like there is more resources and things available than ever before, which is a really positive thing. But then there's also like diagnose yourself with, autism through TikTok or like just these ways in which I think it can breed also misinformation and lots of misunderstanding as well.
Right. Or the idea that you're broken. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's jump into trauma. Maybe say a little bit more about how is anxiety and trauma related?
Well, let me give you a couple of definitions of how I see trauma. And my favorite is that trauma is an experience that overwhelms your capacity to cope and creates disconnection from yourself, others, or your sense of safety. So I can make that simpler by saying trauma is not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. That's from Gabor Mate, his definition.
Okay.
So I think we're trained to think of trauma as like, in a medical sense, like a head trauma. It happens, right? I mean, or something happens to your body. Trauma in the mental health sense can be one incidence, right? I might call that big T trauma. Big T trauma and little T trauma. Big T trauma is an event that overwhelms your system for coping. And those are the things that you normally think of as traumatic, right? Any kind of a violence or rape or anything like that. We're pretty used to seeing that as trauma. But there's little T trauma too that we often overlook. Remember, if trauma is what overloads your system, right, and disconnects you from yourself, you can imagine that someone who has been bullied repeatedly in school or, even had a 5th grade experience where there was like one moment in your life or one section of a year in your life where I've been repeatedly bullied, that disconnects you from yourself and you can download all sorts of false ideas about yourself. And I consider that traumatic too. I consider neglect, emotional neglect, physical neglect fits in that category too, because it all disconnects you from yourself.
Is there I wrestle with this a little bit. Like on one hand, again, I think it's incredible that there's so much more information out there about anxiety, trauma, and things like that. On the other hand, it feels like everybody is kind of traumatized or has experienced trauma. Can we take that too far? I don't know. Is there I can clearly remember an incident where a kid in the playground made fun of me for being fat when I was in middle school. I wasn't bullied throughout, but I remember that. That stuck with me. I had to work through that.
Right.
Is that trauma? Is that just like life?
Did it disconnect you from yourself? Did it make you feel unsafe?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, for a while, and then you, what did you do? You said you worked through it. What does that mean?
I may need a session to fully get through it because I still remember it. And it's still,
Right.
No, I did. Like to this day, like because I think I was wearing like a t-shirt that was a little tight. And so to this day, if I have a t-shirt that's a little tight, I'll think of that.
Right.
But then I can kind of process it and
It's
like,
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's there.
And you can, but now what you said, that was really important. You said, I can process it, right? Not all of us have the tools or have grown into that place where we know how to process it, right?
So it's still something that could define me today.
It could define you.
Yeah.
Right. So if the message that you downloaded was that I'm unworthy because I don't look good in this t-shirt, that spreads into other areas of your life if you don't have any tool to counteract it. If you don't have the ability to step back and observe or to, heal it in some way.
So, and that's what you were saying earlier. It's not just what happened to you, but how we think about what happened to us that
Right.
often is where the trauma kind of comes in. Like there's certain lies or certain ways we start seeing ourselves or other people because of that trauma.
Right. I think that's very
Say more
true.
about that. Like how does that shape how does that play out? So something happens to me. What happens if that somehow I carry it with me?
Right. So I talk a lot about downloaded messages, right? Because the child brain isn't fully connected yet, right? They're trying to make sense of a world that they just, their brains don't have the capacity or the information or the experience to connect it all. So they're trying to understand things like my parents are getting divorced, right? Children will naturally say, well, it must be because of me. Well, that's not true, right? But they come to that downloaded message of I'm the problem. There's something, and I'm not saying that every child of a divorced family feels this way, but it's a very natural thing.
Right.
So giving that, if that child grows up and just is encountering the world with that belief system about themselves, all sorts of different protectors and coping mechanisms come up, and it repeats itself, right? Oh, well, I had a girlfriend and that didn't work. I must be unworthy, right? And it gets repeated and repeated and repeated until you can go back to that original downloaded message and reparent it or heal it in a way that they can then take that, what you were talking about, and say, well, I can process through it and recognize that just because this person snubbed me doesn't mean that I'm not worthy. Right?
Yeah. So trauma and anxiety, like when I think of, you talk about anxiety being this thing that helps us detect whether they're safe or not. Trauma, it seems like, has a way of making the world seem much more unsafe than maybe it was before. Like before trauma happened, I didn't even think that this could happen to me, but now it did.
Right.
And I mean, would you say that like, so it almost heightens our awareness of danger, makes us more
Absolutely
hypervigilant?
And this might be a good point to bring in the internal family systems theory. Can I do that?
Hear more and understand more about that.
Okay. So the way I think about that is that when the trauma happens, we develop parts of us that become vigilant about it not happening again. And those parts come out in so many different ways, but it is the wounding, and we can call it trauma. I generally call it wounding, right? Okay. Or the downloaded message. It happens, and then we don't want it to happen again because that was really painful. So we develop ways that it won't happen again, and those ways that we develop, I would say, are protectors. That's language from internal family systems. And the theory there is that we are all made up of a multiplicity of parts. And that means...
So essentially we have a family living inside us. This is essentially the idea, right? It's it's an internal family made up of different parts, different roles.
For sure. And and this a really important tenet of that is that all of those parts, all of our family is trying to help us, even if
they don't seem very helpful.
even if they're not getting quite what they want, right? Yeah. So we may have a part that wants to numb us out because we feel unlovable, and it chooses alcohol to do the numbing. And then that gets our relationship stirred up, right? Because we can't be present with them, which reinforces the idea, right, that I'm not lovable. And but this part that comes up as the number or the addicted part doesn't know that. It's just trying to make it not hurt as much. In that way, it's an altruistic part.
So even though it might not be adaptive in terms of the net effect,
Right.
You're saying kind of the heart of it would be to try to protect and try and keep me from feeling pain, keep the person who's using alcohol or whatever to keep them from feeling the pain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you talk about the interplay between trauma and anxiety, I see that anxiety just as a part, right? It is a part of you that is trying to protect you. And rather than shaming it or trying to shut it down or redirecting it, turning towards it with compassion and curiosity, there's that word again, we can learn about what that anxiety is trying to do and lean into connecting with it and unburden it from the heaviness that the job that it thinks it has, the role that it thinks it has. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what might it be trying to do?
Well, this is good because I have an anxious part. Anxious parts are definitely protectors. They're trying to protect you from the pain of that core wound. And usually the core wounds are either that I'm not enough or I'm alone. So my core wound is probably more that I'm alone or I'm going to be alone. So my anxious part is definitely triggered when I feel like I'm going to be alone, right? Or abandoned. So that anxious part starts to do everything like, what does that person think? And where are they going? She starts managing as much as she can manage so that I won't feel alone, right? What she doesn't know all the time, my anxious part, that I'm not alone, right? I can bring that perspective to her. But it took a long time and a lot of practice in getting to know that anxious part.
Would you say that, so when I think of, some of the parts work that we've talked about, I have a part that gets highly defensive. Like I just want to defend my honor, my intentions. I want to be seen as a good person. So there's a part of, as I've understood parts, as you've talked about it, there's the wounded part, and then the protector is trying to protect that wounded part. So somehow in an interaction with Beth, that wounded part is getting triggered. I'm feeling attacked in some way. And so then this other part jumps in to protect that part.
For sure.
And starts explaining why I did what I did, or defending what I did, or minimizing what I did.
Right.
All to help that wounded part not feel so much shame or feel so bad.
Right. That's exactly
but
right.
Doesn't always come across to Beth as
No, I'm sure that it lands on her differently, right? Because she has her own wounded part that she's protecting.
And that defensiveness does something to her wounded part. It kind of invalidates for her the emotion that she had just expressed, her pain or whatever it is that she had just expressed.
And that's what we do in intensives. Like, we just get to know those parts in a non-shaming, safe way so that you can understand who's really doing the dance here, right? It's not the whole of you, because you're not always a defensive guy, right? It just comes out when that wound gets triggered. So seeing that as a part and understanding what it's doing is very helpful, not only for you to understand, but for your spouse to say,
yeah, very much so. That I think was one of the more helpful parts for us anyways, understanding when I react a certain way or Beth reacts a certain way, oh, that's what that's about. Like, it's about that part and protecting that part.
Right.
It's not about me or...
Right.
And one of the more helpful phrases that you taught us was the idea of speaking for our parts rather than from our parts. Would you explain that a bit?
Right. So that has to do with what I call the internal U-turn. So when we're in a conflict with someone and our parts are triggered, right, the defender comes out, it's really important for me to go inside and talk to my own part with curiosity, not with shame, just what is happening inside of me that this part is afraid will happen if I don't do this, right? If I don't defend, what does this part think is going to happen, right? So I come with curiosity so that I can deal with the defender, and then I can return to my partner and I can say, okay, so I have this part in me that really wants to defend right now because it's afraid of X, Y, Z. That's a good example of talking for that part, because you never want to invalidate the part. It's trying hard to protect you. It's just not getting it done in the way that it's hoping, right? But when you bring in that self energy of like, I can talk to my own part, I can talk to my own wound, and then turn around and speak for them to you, that gives you the opportunity to talk to my whole self, my centered, calm self, rather than my defensive part.
Yeah. Yeah, the challenge, like you had your little brain image, and that it's amazing how quickly to move to that part of the brain where it's just fight or flight kind of response.
Absolutely.
Do you have any tips on how to re-engage the frontal lobe, or how to? I think some of it probably is just work. It's work in recognizing that pattern and catching yourself and having those conversations. But how do you, when you find yourself getting triggered and going to that kind of that protector, like?
So there's a couple of different things. I would say practice is one for sure. The mindfulness of knowing what's happening inside of you, and it's okay to take a pause in a conflict with someone. Now, that may trigger your partner if their fear is abandonment, right?
Right.
But it's okay to have that conversation before you're in the conflict with your partner to say, if something comes up in me, I might need 5 minutes. I'm talking a short pause, right? And I'll come back, right? Or 10 minutes. And then take that 5 or 10 minutes to say, what is going on in me, right? And then coming back and being able to speak for the part. So a pause is okay as long as you've agreed upon it, and that person knows you're coming back. And don't take a pause and never come back.
Right.
Because that hits the wound twice as hard. It's like a double whammy. So a pause, breathing, because of the biology of it, right? Oftentimes in conflict, once you've practiced this, you can have a dual conversation, right? You can be listening to whatever part, or maybe your partner has got out, and also saying okay, I think that's a part of my partner. I do feel my defensiveness coming up. I'm wondering if that defensiveness could just step back for a second so I can stay in curiosity and see really what's going on with my partner. I'm having that conversation inside while this conversation is going on outside.
Yeah. So it's the awareness, first of all, of what all is going on, bringing that curiosity, breathing, and trying to have that internal conversation with those various parts.
And I might say, that's kind of what therapy is.
Yeah.
I really see therapy as just an opportunity for everyone to get to know what's going on inside of them. Because it is going on inside of you, whether you know it or not.
Yeah. Let's shift a little bit to that. What are some things available to people who may be struggling with anxiety? Let's start with maybe just anxiety. Again, trauma, there may be overlap between both of those, but in the moment, someone experiences more acute anxiety, the heart starts beating, like what are some very practical ways people can calm their nervous system? You mentioned a little bit like breathing, but what else would you add to that?
Getting outside. It's there's something about getting under the sky and taking that deep breath that will be very helpful. There's biological interventions called the five senses, like changing one of the five senses. So taking a drink of water or holding on to an ice cube because it feels, it feels different, or removing yourself from that situation. These are all things you can do in the middle of a panic attack that will help regulate your system again. Now, a panic episode is different than other.
There'd be more of a, you must maybe describe that a little bit for somebody who has not, that's not just feeling anxiety. I mean, it's a whole thing in and of itself.
Yeah. A panic episode is, oftentimes it's not really connected with a trigger in front of you, right? Oftentimes what happens in panic is that I'm feeling fine, and all of a sudden my heart starts racing and my palms get sweaty and I feel literally like I'm going to die, or there's some kind of threat.
People literally go to the hospital thinking they're having a heart attack.
Right.
Because of the
chest
pressure and heart beating. And
Right. So that's a panic episode. There are interventions you can do for that. And I might say, if it's a chronic thing, right, and you're getting the therapy and it's continuing, medication is sometimes helpful, right? I'm not opposed to that at all. So that's an intervention you could consider if that's something you're struggling with. The kind of drip anxiety, do you know what I mean by that? Like your adrenal glands are just dripping. It's like a worry. Eventually what happens is that adrenaline gets built up in your system and it flips over into like real panic, right? But there are things that you can do for the drip that will help. And they're probably practices that you already have talked about, right? Just taking that time to recenter yourself, whether it be journaling or meditation or prayer, or if you can start the day with your adrenal glands not activated, right? Or, your trigger is lower, then it's going to take more to flip you over into that extreme anxiety. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. So starting the day with some relaxation methods, some deep breathing, some mindfulness, things that just bring a sense of calm. I think the other benefit of that is it's almost like practicing the ability to calm yourself before you hit something that brings anxiety. You're actually building muscles in terms of practicing deep breathing, practicing calming self-talk, practicing all the things that would help in that moment.
Right.
When
that's perfect.
Anxiety hits.
Yeah, it's a good way to say it. It is like building a muscle and practicing, living in a way, at least getting to calm, right? Like that's a practice in itself, because we live in such a anxious world that sometimes we even forget what it feels like to be calm.
You mentioned journaling. Say more about what's the best way to use journaling to deal with anxiety or even trauma.
Yeah. I think it's different for everyone, right? I think that the method of journaling is different for everyone. So I've known art journaling to be very helpful for people because it gets them out of the language center of their brain, right? And more into their emotive center. I personally journal parts. So I have conversations with my parts. My curiosity is in one color and the response of my part is in a different color. That's a method. There's lots of journal prompts. There's just a bunch of resources out there of different types of journaling that it just depends on the person and what resonates with them. And sometimes journaling is not the thing, right? That's not going to resonate with everyone. But taking a walk in the woods might, right? Wherever I feel calm, right? Whatever, and not numbed out. That's different.
Yeah, right. Yeah. One of I think the natural ways of coping with anxiety and trauma to some degree is just avoiding whatever it is that's going to trigger the anxiety. And so sometimes the battle with anxiety is just courage to face certain things. What would you have to say to that? Like, what's the balance there of pushing ourselves to be courageous and face certain things, but then also being compassionate and recognizing some things maybe are that's too soon or that's too quick?
Yeah, I would say this phrase has really resonated with me, that we are wounded in community and we're healed in community. And so if you're regularly struggling with anxiety, it is likely from a downloaded message, right? And one way to heal that is to be in community with somebody, right? And to a compassionate, healing community. So that could look like a therapist relationship. That's what therapy is supposed to be. It could be a group. It could be a prayer group. But connecting with people that can compassionately witness and see you is incredibly healing. Even if you could say, yeah, I'm really anxious, right? I think that's the most effective way to heal. I think that's how Jesus did it.
Yeah, I love that. And then again, that push-pull, like if you're wounded in community, the message can be avoid.
Right.
Avoid people. Avoid, don't put yourself out there.
Right.
And finding a safe place where you can do that and safe people where you can do that.
Yeah, it's out there.
Yeah.
It exists.
Yeah.
Because sometimes our parts don't think it does. Right.
Anything you would add in terms of trauma, like when it comes to people who have experienced trauma, and what's the path to healing look like for trauma?
I would say definitely talk to somebody. Talk to somebody. I mean, because trauma can show up in emotional ways, behavioral ways, relational ways, right? We can, I don't know if you've ever had the experience of being fine one moment and then one little thing happens and you totally over-rotate and all of a sudden you're flipped out. That's probably a sign that there's a wound under there. Yeah. You can call it trauma. You have to call it trauma. But if that's happening to you, if you're having responses that you don't understand, like, why am I so sad all the time? Or why do I flip out at my spouse when that happens, right? Yeah. I would say ask those questions with somebody who can help you find the answers.
That's probably a very simple, basic thing for me that I learned along the way is that, I think early on, Beth would say or do something and I'd feel this trigger. And in my head, it was all her. Like, she said or did this that made me feel this way.
Right.
And it was easy to direct the energy toward her rather than, well, why did I react so strongly to what it is that she just said or did?
Right.
And begin looking more inward to understand, okay, maybe she said or did something that triggered it, but there was something in me that got triggered.
For sure.
And that awareness really helped me. So I love that just being aware of our own reactions, and especially any sudden kind of reaction, that it's a sign that there's something under the surface there that probably got touched.
I also want to mention that the inner critic, I see a lot of that in my office. And so often people aren't aware that is a voice inside of them. They just think that it is them, right? I am bad, or I should have been better, or I should do more, I should be prettier. It's really helpful to sit with somebody who can and train you how to unblend from that part enough to see that it's not, it's not you, right? It's a part of you that's doing something that might think that you're bad or have a whole bunch of judgments of you and other people. But it's super helpful to be able to unblend and sit with somebody that can see the good in you, and see you with unconditional positive regard. I mean, that's part of what I just love about what I do, because it feels like holy ground to sit with someone, especially if they think that they are not worthy.
Yeah.
And see, you are delightful.
Yeah.
And be able to have that space for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of those, I mean, I get some of that still as a pastor. Think of a woman who is older, who recently just shared some trauma that she experienced that she had never shared before. And just to see the shame kind of melt away as she was able to verbalize it and then experience kind of love and acceptance and non-judgment in that moment. It was just a super healing and powerful. And then you know, there are times where we'll because in our faith walk, like that inner critic and that stuff gets mixed up with our spiritual walk too. Like, so God becomes a critical God, and we hear, you know, those kind of critical voices about what God thinks of me, and so for her also to experience kind of a different voice of God, you know, and being able to accept His love or experience His love. It's
I mean,
sacred.
that's the stuff of life, right? Yeah.
It's totally sacred.
Yeah. That's very cool.
Any other thoughts you would bring to? I do have. Somebody sent me a question, and I thought, okay, I've got to ask you this because I think it's a great question. This was a parent who has struggled with anxiety, and their question are: what are some practical steps parents can take to help set their children up for victory in this? If you know, like, boy, we as parents struggle with this. There's a risk. Like, what do we do to help our kids not experience anxiety?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I would say first, be really intentional about finding your own healing for that and your own understanding of what's going on inside of you. But also, you can bring your kid along on the journey, right? There are tons of resources out there for kids to learn to be mindful or to emotionally regulate, or it's in a vocabulary of how we see emotions, whether we're allowing the emotions, right? Or whether we're shutting them down. That question indicates that you're already on a journey of curiosity about this. And I would say go with that. Find out what's happening with your own anxious part, and then bring your kid along with the tools that you're learning, right? It's time in the afternoon. We often have nap time, or if they grow out of nap time, we think it's done. But we can teach kids how to sit quiet, right? Or when they're going to bed, right? What does it look like to calm your mind, right? And to have those conversations and to not shame each other.
Yeah. It's maybe totally random, but I ran across a study a while back of rats. This had to do with trauma being passed on to kids.
Oh, yes. I told you about this book.
Did you tell me about
I think I did.
Okay. Rats were exposed to this, I think it was the smell of cherry blossoms.
Oh, maybe
paired with electric shock.
Oh.
And what they found is that the rats, the baby rats, had a physical reaction to the smell of cherry blossoms, even though they weren't exposed to that. And even the next generation experienced that. So that there's a way in which trauma can kind of be passed along. I just found that incredibly fascinating. That part of our role as parents is to help heal not only our trauma, but how that may get passed on to our kids without them being aware of it.
Right. We often talk about in my office being a legacy breaker. That you might have a long line of things being passed down because, and I think in that research, the rats feel that reaction for like 3 or 4 generations, and then it starts to dissipate. But you can be that person that kind of comes fully alive and awake to your own healing journey, and be the legacy breaker so that your kid doesn't necessarily have to deal with the same thing that you dealt with. And it's a process. I talk about the 2-degree shift over time puts you in a very different place further down the road. So being gentle with yourself and saying, I might be able to do a 2-degree shift today. And that's enough. That's enough. Because 10 years from now, it's going to be very different.
Huge.
Yeah.
Anything we missed that you'd want to just share with anyone who's listening, struggling with anxiety or trauma?
No, I would just say that you're not alone, that you don't have to be alone, that part of the beliefs of our parts that are born very young are that you don't have help, right? That you have to do it yourself, or that it's up to you to protect yourself. But there's still good in the world. There's still people out there that are trained and know how to help. And if you meet with someone and that's not a great fit, don't give up. Look for somebody else because it's out there. It's out there.
That's good. Yeah, our whole sermon series title is Not Alone. And the main reason was I just think there's so much healing. One, there's so much pain that continues when people feel alone in it.
Right.
And there's so much healing power in knowing you're not alone. One, that other people experience that too, but that also that there are people here to support you and help you get through it. So,
right.
Love that.
I like that title.
And thank you for being here today, your time, and what you do. It is sacred work. I mean, I've personally benefited. Our marriage has benefited from it.
I'm so glad.
And I've learned a lot from you over the years. And keep it up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here, really, and to continue the work, right?
Yeah.
To continue the work.
We didn't talk about, part of what you've been doing is meeting with our staff. So we have a mental health grant this year. It's part of what we're doing here. And as a part of that, you've been coming in and doing some sessions, some 90-minute and some 3-hour sessions with our staff.
Yeah, they go fast, right?
They do go fast, and you get us moving, and we've learned a lot. So thank you for that piece too.
Yeah. I love it. It gives me an opportunity to grow and learn as well, and to get to know the staff. And if I could, I'd do intensives and group work like that all the time.
That's great. And it's helped us as a staff get to know each other. And, Jesse's sitting over there and he's got some issues. So maybe we want to spend some time dealing with...
No shame.
No shame. No. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to the continued work that we're going to do as a staff together. That really has been meaningful. So,
good.
Forward to that.
Thanks for asking me.
Yep.
Well, thanks again for joining us for today's episode of the Maple City Podcast. You can watch for more episodes coming out on the Maple City Chapel app, and you can also find more information about our church, the events going on, the resources available to you. You can also join us on Sunday mornings at 8:30, 10, and 11:30. We hope to see you there. Until then, let's go and be the church.